The Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Hogsty Presents It's Just Business, a show that we look at the business and the dollars and cents of the sports industrial complex that we both love and loathe. I am joined, as always, by my two partners in crime, maybe theme for the week, Rich and Steve. Rich, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Beautiful Saturday here, low 60s. Going to be doing some grilling and chilling today.
Grill all weekend is my philosophy. Steve, how you doing?
I don't know how to grill, unfortunately. I know that's like somehow unmanly, but I don't know how to grill. Just sue me. I'm sorry. I lack that capability utterly. Even though it's a fine day here for grilling, here in Texas, it's sunny, it's bright, it's warm, all of that. And if I had that ability, I would certainly do it, but I don't. So
wow, I'm proud of you for admitting that, Steve.
I don't know how to cook anything. Okay, I had a house before I was married that when I left that house, the owner's manual was still in the oven. God's honest truth.
All right.
Because I literally never opened it.
That's pretty amazing. All right, so let's jump into it. It's not confessional. It's not Hogsty Presents Male Confessionals. So let's move on to our first topic. The NBA did something interesting this week where they ratified, the owners approved, a new rule tweak that looks to make it for the top, that's wrong. The worst three teams in the NBA all have the same lottery chance for the number one pick, with the goal of, at least an incremental goal, I think even the NBA would agree this is not a holistic fix to this tanking problem, but it is an attempt to lessen the incentive for teams to tank it for the top pick, or at least give themselves a better chance for the top pick. So it's a step towards that. And will it help bring a little bit more parity to the NBA? My personal feeling, and then I'll let you all jump in, is that this really is swatting at flies, and that until the NBA starts to really legitimately accept parity and think about the balance of the star system and small markets, etc., that things like this are nice but probably ineffectual. Anyone have a jump in opinion off that?
I just don't know how you get parity in the NBA. I mean, I get it. They need to do this because this tanking stuff is just embarrassing. The league ought to be humiliated, for what's been going on. The 76ers have been barely participating in league activities for several years. My beloved Lakers tanked the second half of the season last year. I mean, I get it, and it's all because of the lottery. But yes, I think this will help because you don't have so much of a race to the bottom. And what they've done with the odds is they've given the bottom three teams the same odds to get the number one pick. That's what's happened. And that'll help a little bit. But like you said, I think it's swatting at flies, to use your expression, because it's not going to fix the problem. I promise I just don't know how to fix it. When you have five guys on the court and it's a star-driven league, how do you prevent this? In a way that's fair. That's the problem. How do you do it in a way that's fair? You could mix up and have the draft be just a complete lottery for everybody. But then you have the Warriors luck into the number one pick, and that's not really fair or equitable either. So I really don't know what the solution is. I just know it's a problem.
I think that, as you mentioned, this is a star-driven league, and I think that one of the issues, and something personally that I don't like, is the sort of the join-up trend that's going with, LeBron and KD. And I think that says something to a couple of things. Is one, this is definitely, maybe so much more than other sports, a championship-driven league. In other words, greatness is defined by championship wins and rings. So players are feeling some urgency in that if they want to be in the pantheon of greatness, they need a championship. So they leave to join up and make these super teams. I think that the interesting thing is how this could be addressed, and I don't know when the next collective bargaining comes up.
2024.
Yeah, is how this. It's be interesting to see what the players' union's thoughts are on this, and how the NFL, the NBA will actually maybe tweak the free agency process. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Well, I think an interesting tie into this is there's another article. I don't know if I sent this to you. If I didn't, I meant to. But there's an ESPN.com article from September 19th that says a confidential report shows nearly half the NBA lost money last season. Now what? And what this is talking about is, while there is revenue sharing in the NBA, there's a lot more local revenue in the NBA than in the NFL. The NBA keeps the ticket revenue. They keep all the local ad revenue. The top four teams profit-wise in the NBA include two teams that have been bad for years, the Lakers and the Knicks. Lakers, Knicks, Bulls. The Bulls haven't exactly been, great either. Despite the fact that they're bad, and it all comes down to market, and it comes down to ticket sales and marketing money, right? And so you have teams like the Grizzlies who are stuck in mediocrity, who aren't ever going to get the number one pick in the draft lottery, and are losing money, or making next to no money. And it's, I think there's a synergy in those two topics, and because it's such a star-driven league, because especially since these players like LeBron and company are meeting up, I think it's actually exacerbating the problem, not helping it.
So I'm gonna have a theme through all three of our topics this week. And which is where we look to the edges for solutions and problems without ever addressing some of the systemic things that drive where we are and why we obsess on the edges or think we can fix at the edges to solve big problems. And so this, to me, is another example of that in terms of what both of you brought up. If we're actually not looking at what's a more equitable revenue sharing model that undergirds parity, if we're not thinking about how to break up the team up pieces, anything that isn't going right at those things and involving all stakeholders to think about the long view of the sport and the game, some of these things won't matter. Now, in a positive light, they could be steps towards everyone realizing that and doing incremental fixes to get to a place where you have to think about the systemic issues. But the reality is, one of the things that drives the join me team up culture right now is because it actually is one of the only ways it may benefit small market teams. Because if you are lucky enough to have landed something that through the top of the draft, and that player, it turns out to be a superstar and can be an attractive, then your OKCs and your Cleveland and places like that can actually get those 2 to 3 superstar teams if they've got a magnetic enough center, not the position, just the superstar, to attract. So it's actually one of the reasons why the league and the teams don't argue too loudly against it is because it does actually help small and medium market teams over time. It is one of their only accelerants to relevancy.
Well, you mentioned over time, and that's a key point, because if you're tanking, you're hoping to get a top college prospect, but how many top college players are actually coming in the league, in the NBA, their first year and having a significant impact on their team?
One or two, maybe.
Yeah. You have to wait 1, 2, 3 years, but in that, while you're waiting 1, 2, 3 years and you're building, other teams, other super teams are getting stronger and more dominant, and they're getting players in their prime. So, for instance, if you look at if you look at the Washington Wizards have some nice pieces. But are the Washington Wizards going to be able to position themselves at some point to be dominant for a long period of time, with building and getting pieces as they have been able to do with the draft and a couple of pieces here in free agency, as opposed to backdoor deals and, KD calling up Steph Curry and LeBron calling up Kyrie Irving say, hey man, let's get together.
You could make a case. You can make a case the Bullets have played the Longview. Sorry, did I say Bullets? The Wizards have.
Go Bullets. Bullets fever.
I'm old. Have actually played the Longview potentially smart in that John Wall has hit on many of the metrics you would say in terms of the craps game at the top of the draft. And he's entering a stretch in his career where 1, 2, 3 more seasons, he might be able to have legitimate pull to be that magnetic force that, could do the backdoor call-ins. And they're competitive enough to good in a market, a bigger market in the U.S. where you can be mediocre to good and make money, as opposed to being mediocre to good in a place like Memphis.
I just like to point out that there really aren't too many super teams. I think the last real super team was probably that, the Heatles team, with LeBron, Bosh, and Wade. Those guys were all brought in. And I think the Oklahoma City Thunder now is certainly probably a super team now that they brought in Carmelo Anthony. But Russell Westbrook was a homegrown star that they just lucked into and fell into by virtue of good drafting, right? The Golden State Warriors won a championship as a homegrown team, driven by Jerry West, developed by Jerry West. They brought in Kevin Durant, yes, but they won their first title with guys who were all drafted there. They're just good, and then they gotten better. And I'm not sure I'm willing to call them a super team just because they brought in Kevin Durant, And the same thing goes with the Cavaliers. They brought in LeBron James, but Kyrie Irving was drafted there. Some of this, I think, is just jealousy, frankly. But look, I think this whole draft reform thing, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a leak in the Hoover Dam. This is going to help, but in no way is it ever going to. It's never going to eliminate the star culture of the NBA, and I don't think he really wanted to get rid of the star culture in the NBA. More importantly, do we really want that? Do we really want to have all parity and have sort of a lesser impact of the NBA stars? I'm not sure we want that as NBA fans.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know what year it was. Maybe you guys know it off the top of your head. But the year that the Dallas Mavericks beat the Miami Heat.
I think it was 2007, 2008.
Yeah, that was interesting in that that's what the NBA actually really needs, is like the David versus Goliath. It was supposed to be LeBron and his new team and the big three, and they ended up going in and getting waxed by the Dallas Mavericks. And I think that actually would benefit the NBA, where you've got teams that are, you've got these super teams with the big three, and maybe smaller market or teams that are not as talent rich actually beating the bigger teams. So I think that would be a story that the NBA would want to push as well.
That's a great point, Rich. This is a far from over, as I sort of said. This particular story is but a drip in a larger, the larger kind of systemic issues the NBA will have to look at to stay relevant and stay competitive, and maybe even march to being the number one sport in America, which it's possibly on a path to being. So it's definitely something that we will continue to follow, and the NBA season's just around the corner to rev up. But we're going to jump over to the league that really matters at this time of the year, the NFL. And Rich, you're going to introduce a topic for us about the London Games as we sort of begin our run last week of the virtual season or virtual half season in the UK, London specifically. Rich, take it away.
All right, so London is calling, and the NFL has figured out a way to insert its product into a country, number one, that's thousands of years much older than ours, and the interesting thing is that the NFL has inserted its product into a country and a market that, let's be clear, is strictly driven by soccer, or what they would call football. And I think that this is a very fascinating topic, in that the NFL, they have played 21 games in London. And just a few numbers before we get started. There have been over 300,000 fans in attendance at these games. And here's what's interesting. Of those fans that have participated and visited, 40,000 last season, 40,000 fans went to all of the games played last year. And I thought that was a very fascinating number. So what we're saying is that in relative short order and a short amount of time, I think you could consider that a fan base. And we're talking about 40,000 fans. The NFL has also viewership for NFL games in London is up 61%. So as much as we have maligned the NFL here in the United States for ratings and dipping ratings and issues with the game, it seems to be taking hold in London. And as much as we criticize the NFL for its business ventures and Thursday night football, I actually applaud the NFL for its slow build and diligence with building a product in London. It may not be the best from American eyes, but clearly from European eyes, the NFL has something going here.
Yeah, my problem with the NFL's venture into London has never been London per se. Really, to me, it's a logistical thing because, I'm not sure how a London team would have competitive fairness being based out of London when they have to travel to, a 9-hour flight to Seattle, say, for example. And, and there's time zone issues. That's really my bigger problem than I don't think the NFL is a uniquely American game. I don't think there's some sort of, anti-patriotic thing done by putting a team in London. I'm not sure 40,000 people is enough of a fan base. Our beloved Redskins, for example, have about 70,000 season ticket holders. 70,000 some season ticket holders, not just 40. So I think they have building to do. To me, really, what do you do with one team in London? What division are they in? How do they travel? How do you deal with the fact that it's more expensive to live in London than it is in the United States? Do you give the players a COLA, cost of living adjustment, or something, or maybe more importantly than the players, the staff, the secretaries, I don't know. I like the fact that it's a slow build though. I think it would have been the worst thing they could have done is just dump a team in London without doing what they're doing. So they're getting there, but I think there's a lot of logistical issues to fix.
So I'm going to start with two positives, and then I'm going to rant a little. Anyway, so one, just anecdotal thing. For the last 7 years, I have a trip for work in London that overlaps with a game. In fact, last year it overlapped with the Skins-Bengals game. I unfortunately could not go because of said work overlap. But I have noticed every year I've been there for the 7 years, there is a buzz. It is very startling to see NFL jerseys on Brits, but you start to see that more and more. And you definitely know the NFL is there, even in a city the size and scale of London. So that is something, at least an anecdotal observation. And I also agree with Steve that I think that the methodical approach is benefiting them, and I think actually has driven lots of the metrics, Rich, that you talk about in terms of a progress towards success and, good feedback. But I got to be honest. So maybe I'm going to I'm going to go against type and put my red, white, and blue 3-piece suit on. I know. I'm playing you on TV. I'm playing you on TV this week. I don't care. Yes, I actually do think it's a uniquely American game. I do think it actually has a lot of the U.S. id wrapped up into it. And I think that the fascination and the interest that goes into actually building these new markets is actually one of the things that's eroding having a more maniacal focus on ensuring the shield and the game and the health of the game and the battling against its own hubris that the NFL problems have. And I think, to me, London fully represents that. There's no need for this. The golden goose could only get fatter if you actually care about a lot of the structural problems in the game that are eroding like a seawall in the Outer Banks. And so going and looking towards places like London, where you have to manufacture interest over what we're going to maybe even start to count as in decades, to me is you got to have the eyes on the prize. And I see too much that's going to tank football's as a sport and its future viability at risk here, and dalliances with international fan bases for something that I do think is an American cultural thing are dumb. And I think it's going to end up be one of those things we cite when we're doing the eulogy for football's dominance in sports culture.
Well, first of all, the NFL is never going to be the number one sport in London and Britain because it's soccer, and it's always going to be soccer. They're always going to play second fiddle to soccer, or what they would call football. The Manchester United? They're the most valuable franchise in the world. For those of you who don't know, so but the thing is, it's a short to mid-term money thing with the NFL. Like for example, the Jacksonville Jaguars have pretty much the worst market in the NFL, right? It's the smallest market. They have the most problem with ticket sales. And at this point, the NFL has basically tapped every viable market but one or two in the country. And so they see London, which is a huge, gigantic city, as big as New York City, basically.
Bigger.
And yeah, bigger. Is the population of London itself bigger than New York? I don't know. I'll take your word for it. Anyway, point is, I think they see that pot of gold. And I mean, would the Jacksonville, if the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars moved his team to London, he probably would make more money on an annual basis, realistically. But I just don't know what they do. I think unless you have an entire European division, I don't know how. I think it's almost unworkable. I just don't know how you make the Los Angeles Rams travel to Seattle and then, have a home game on the next week. How do you make the London Monarchs, say, have a game in London and then have a game in Dallas and then travel to Jacksonville? And I think there's a competitive balance problem more than anything.
And I see no evidence. Oh, go ahead, Rich.
I think you're right. I do think that there's a competitive. I think that's a legit issue. I do want to cite a couple of things, though, and I think this is a point that we need to make. First of all, and just because it's just business. The NFL is a business, and they care about money. And if there's a dollar to be made, then I don't hate the NFL for trying to do it. I think, again, 40,000 people in London have gone to all of the games. The thing is, it is always going to be an American sport. You're 100% right. But if the NFL has been able to get 40,000 people to go to all of the games in a soccer-dominated country, I think that's some momentum. And then another final point is that the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Jacksonville makes 15% of its annual revenue off of the London games. So, yeah, I mean, if we can talk about the NFL and the issues that we have here at home, but I don't hate the NFL for continuing to try to push this market. I mean, I think it has some potential. So, I don't hate the game. I don't hate the idea, but I do think that there is some competitive balance issues and some logistics.
I hate the idea.
Particularly, I think it's even the competitive balance issues are exacerbated if they just put an expansion team in London.
Yeah,
that makes it worse. But like say Jacksonville moves, well,
right.
Are they going to stay in the AFC East or AFC South? Well, they're in the AFC South, right? I mean, are they going to stay in the AFC South? Because that makes no sense. And how do they play Carolina and then one day and then the Dolphins the next? I think it's unworkable in that regard. And my problem with too much expansion is I don't know if there's the talent available coming out of college football ranks to adequately stock 4 more teams to create a European division.
Oh,
I think the NFL is a little short-sighted if that's where they're going with this.
There definitely isn't, especially if you start to future cast the NFL's talent pipeline over decades. And look at something like the CTE research that just came out this week that starts to say they have a way to probably see if a living person has CTE damage, which,
I
can guarantee you that's going to freak the NFL
Yeah, it already
out.
is. So I totally agree there. It is pence wise and pound foolish, to put a UK spin on a typical cliche. So yes, I don't deny, and Rich, it's hard to argue against a lot of those metrics that they're seeing that would make them excited and from a new market strategy be paying off as an investment. It's kind of hard to argue against that, at least right now. But I do think that businesses overextend themselves all the time, and where short or midterm success leads to long-term not looking at what is going to sustain them economically as their core business, so to speak. And I think that's the danger that the NFL is displaying here. And again, they're playing around with things at the edges while they don't look at the systemic problems that are chasing them. So we'll see. We'll see. It'll be interesting. I'm sure they'll have a good year. Like I said, I think at a lot of levels it's working. I can't deny that. I think it's dangerous for the sport overall. And we're gonna get in a place where someone's saying in 5 to 10 years, make the NFL great again, and part of that is a focus on its core markets and core business, which is not international expansion.
Well, it's like the NBA was an American game originally. It was Mr. Naismith was from. Was he from Ohio?
Although he invented
No,
it in
that's not
Canada,
right.
which I could care less about, but I was actually in the midst of a pretty heated debate about this a couple weeks ago.
I didn't know he invented Canada, but it's an American. The sport developed in America. The Basketball Hall of Fame, is in New York. It's an American game, and they have successfully turned it into an international game. Now, the same thing could happen with the NFL or American style football. It's they're just in the infant stages of it.
And there are
right
economies
now.
of scale issues again when you look at between those two business models.
Yeah, well, just look at the '92 Dream Team in the Olympics. Jordan, Magic, Larry Bird, and a bunch of other guys. They just absolutely mopped the floor with the international games. It was a complete joke. It was completely non-competitive. And fast forward 20 years, and all of a sudden those games are competitive. It's because basketball has become a global game. There's no reason why the NFL can't do that. It's just going to take a lot of work, and you're looking probably decades down the road. They have to take baby steps somewhere if they're going to do it.
And just think, the NFL has had a kernel of success with doing what soccer could not do, and that is the NFL has generated interest in a soccer-dominated country, whereas you guys remember after the whole World Cup soccer and all of that, there was this thing of whether soccer would take a bigger of a hold, and no one cares about soccer here in America. So, international soccer has not taken hold. There aren't 40,000 fans going to the same, soccer game, here it is. So I think that's a no. But you're right, Chris. I think the NFL has bigger fish to fry. I think the NFL right now has a huge image problem, particularly with, in my opinion, with this whole flag protest thing, and then also with I perceive to be domestic violence and how they the legal system and arbitration and all of that. So I think the NFL does have bigger fish to fry at this point.
The biggest issue that the NFL has to fry is the CTE thing, in my opinion, from the long-term thing.
Yeah.
Because that's going to affect, let's pretend the line, the middle linebacker for, the Vikings gets a CTE diagnosis of positive. You're in the infant stages of it. I mean, if I got that kind of diagnosis, I'd retire immediately if it were me. I think that's a much bigger problem personally, but that's beyond the scope of the discussion. I realize. I just, oddly enough, am not offended by the Yeehaw America thing that you are, Chris, for some reason. It hasn't bothered me. It usually bothers me, but in this case, for some unknown reason.
That's what makes us an interesting bunch, people. You cannot fully pigeonhole us, so we're going to keep you guessing from issue to issue, which will take us to our next issue as we wind down our 3 topics. And easily the biggest sports, money, legal, criminal scandal to hit in a while, and maybe in terms of size and scope since we've been started this show, is this NCAA scandal that's, reads like a, international map of who's who in the college basketball complex. So as our resident legal expert, Steve, we're going to ask you to give us a little bit of an intro here because of just the complexities.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd bet the house that this is just the
sure.
beginning. Okay? I would bet my house that this is just the beginning. Let me try and simplify what has gone on here. The FBI has done an investigation since 2015 into corruption and bribery and money laundering and wire fraud amongst college and high school basketball. Excuse me, okay? And what they have done, they filed 3 separate complaints here indicting coaches from Arizona, Auburn, Oklahoma State, USC, and Louisville, and employees from Adidas. Okay, and so what is the simple version of it is the FBI and the Justice Department allege that Adidas and a bunch of financial advisors and college basketball assistant coaches are in cahoots and are making illicit payments to funnel high school players to certain universities, and two, college players to certain financial advisors upon when they turn pro. And so the biggest question I hear from people is, well, why is this a crime? I get it, it's bad. Why is this a crime? Well, the reason why it's a crime is, for example, the bribery statute that is cited in the complaints is 18 U.S. Code Section 666, and that has to do with bribery concerning programs receiving federal funds. Okay, all these universities, every major university, whether private or public, gets federal money. Okay, and so, for example, Arizona is one, it's a public university. Two, it receives federal funds, and so, and the Arizona, coaches, Manuel Richardson, Chuck Pearson at Auburn, all these guys, Lamont Evans at Oklahoma State, they are public officials. They're employees of public universities and universities that are receiving public funds. And so that is why it's a crime. It's because the U.S. Code specifies that bribery concerning programs, organizations receiving federal funds is against the law. That is why it's a crime. So the point here is that there are two things that happened. One, laundering money to steer money to the families of high school players to convince them to attend certain universities. Louisville was arranging a $100,000 payment through Adidas, for example. And then two, bribing college coaches to steer professional level basketball players to certain financial advisors. That's a simple way to look at it. I think, again, they're just cracking the surface on this thing. So what do you guys think?
Woo, boy. I would wholeheartedly agree that this seems like very much just the first of what will be many dominoes to fall, or tip of the iceberg, or whatever cliche you want to, throw in there. This is just the beginning. Again, I'm a dog with a bone. This show is that, I think this is just the external skin rot of a even more rotten core. And what will be interesting is to see how many people at the edges just pay the price, whether even at the edge of something like a Rick Pitino who getting canned, which is something that's happened this week.
Technically, he was not canned. He was just put on administrative leave.
His lawyer, his lawyer said, which I know has his own agenda, did say he was essentially fired. But and that will probably be he will not coach again at Louisville. I think we can all probably agree.
Probably not going to coach anywhere.
I was even just not going that far, just to say a little bit more accurate. But even a bigwig like Pitino taking some kind of fall, to me, is just rotten skin to an even more rotten core. And if essential issues aren't addressed, then we'll just get more versions of this kind of scandal, and it won't actually matter in terms of cleaning up this sport and industry and colleges.
So I think that this is cyclical. You get something like this every 10, 20 years. And to your point, Chris, it just scratches the surface. It speaks to a deeper issue and a deeper problem with, and we talked about this earlier with the draft piece with the NBA, in just terms of how talent is recruited and how talent is dispersed, and what are some of the sort of backdoor things that are happening in the NCAA. I mean, look, the universities, it's all about winning. It's all about winning and all about generating revenue. And that's what the bottom line is for this. You can't talk about this issue and even going deeper. You have to look at the AAU system and how that has and how that affects this whole process as well. And I'm not suggesting that all AAU coaches are dirty. I have a few friends that coach AAU ball. But as you get kids that are, that high school age, 11th and 12th, 10, 11th, 12th grade, maybe 9th grade, some cases 8th grade, people are coming for these kids. And a lot of these coaches, they don't get paid as much, particularly in the smaller markets. I mean, Patino gets big bucks, but what does Chuck Person make? So, 15, 20 grand to steer a kid to him could be a big deal. So it's a big issue. One that I don't know if the NCAA really wants to peel back. So as long as that's the attitude, I think you'll start seeing these fringe issues.
You said something real interesting there. It's whether the NCAA wants to peel this back. The NCAA is incompetent when it comes to investigations. Let's just make that clear. They're totally incompetent. They can't do it, and they have a vested interest in doing incompetent investigations because they don't really want to know the truth. And what's interesting about this case is that the FBI did not notify the NCAA that this was going on at all. The NCAA found this out when the charges were filed and made public, and there's a reason for that. And I think you're right. I mean, a guy like Chuck Pearson, maybe he could use the money. Lamont Evans at Oklahoma State, he probably makes good living, but he's probably not getting, filthy rich over this. Lest anyone downplay the role of Adidas in this, I'd like to point out that one of the individuals that have been charged is a guy named James Gatto, who is the director of global sports marketing for Adidas. Big-time corporate officer, big wig. In this, it goes to the highest levels. We do have, interestingly enough, a relevant as the ball family turns input into this week, because LeVar was being interviewed on a radio show, and they asked him directly, anybody ever offer you money? And LeVar's answer was, to paraphrase, I got offered money every single summer. Because of Lonzo, and they only stopped when the word got around that we didn't need the money, and he's just one, he's just one guy, and I have to think that it's probably more likely than not that the majority of the big time elite AAU teams, whether they agreed or not, have probably been approached with illicit money through Adidas and Nike and all these teams or all these companies.
The thing, I think, that's super. Well, to follow up on that, Steve, I find it super interesting that as one of the things that may help rip the cover off this in a way the NCAA definitely does not want is the more and more families and players can actually have the financial wherewithal to turn down these bribes, and might be the sort of the strata of family and player that can actually push back against this, or at least resist it enough to call it for what it is. And so, you have, as basketball grows in its dominance, you're going to diversify the social strata of the players and families involved, and which will change the economics just on its own.
I think you're overlooking a real easy way for the Band-Aid to be ripped off, actually. Does anybody really think that these guys at Nike, or at Adidas rather, who've been charged, are really going to go down
right,
swinging?
Yes, they will sing.
They're going to roll, and they're going to sing, and they're going to talk, and they're going to, because what's been charged now is just what the FBI found, But as soon as guys like Miro Code, who's another one Adidas employee, guys like that are going to talk, and they're going to start to try to cut better deals for themselves. Because if you start to add up all the charges, you're talking 80 years in prison. And that's not going to happen. They're not going to get 80 years.
My only point is that they can probably still quarantine the damage if they do it right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so sorry, we got a little distracted there, by a minor technical problem. But yeah, the obvious problem with quarantining this thing is, do you pay players? That's a whole nother discussion, I think. I don't think that's the answer. I think some people do think it's the answer. I don't
know. So I probably do, but I also acknowledge that that's very complex. What I do think is an undeniable problem is that the financial realities driven by the NCAA and the university system, the money counted in billions, is so huge that any economy and business model at that scale necessitates a black market. I mean, that's a wink and a nod. In any economy this big is the acceptance and understanding and valued input of a black market into the healthy and sustaining of the system. And that's what we have when you can have so much exploited labor in the marketplace. You have to then accept the wink, wink, nod of the black market there to help to bring some equity to keep the ecosystem involved healthy. So I think that's the thing I think they're going to have to address at its core. Right now, the NCAA and the system it represents in college basketball acknowledges and accepts essentially a black market because it is part of the holistic ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue against that. I think it's clearly far more widespread than anybody thinks. I think it's probably worse in basketball than other sports. Look, I mean, Reggie Bush got in trouble, what was that, 10 years ago at this point?
Yeah, they lost the championship.
For a lot of these, they lost a championship. It was largely the same stuff. But I just can't believe that, a guy being recruited as the right guard for, I don't know, the University of Arkansas is really being offered money and whatnot at the same level as a 5-star basketball recruit to Louisville,
Yeah, and it sort of goes back to the international expansion conversation in terms of it's just, you can scale basketball just on the logistics and the sport and what you need to run it much easier and faster than you can something of the, overhead of a football team.
The biggest thing I wanted people to get out of this is, because everybody asks, why is this a crime? And I hope I explain that. And the reason why it's a crime is the federal statute says that bribery involving public funds is a federal crime. That's why it's a crime. And we'll see what happens from here. I expect more charges for sure.
Yeah, and more coaches to fall. I think, especially for the immediate implications on the sport, how many, if they can get more pelts, so to speak, like Rick Pitino, it's going to be interesting, some of these guys who have benefited, skirted, and even been tainted by the system over time, but always seem to survive. Like, who will be the next one of those to fall in the scandal as well? Your Calipari's and your sort of Pitino peers.
Yeah, I mean, Rich, final thoughts here, on the whole, basketball scandal and the idea that this is not the end.
It's never going to be the end. I think the NCAA will do what it needs to do to do damage control, but not blow up the whole thing. And what I wouldn't be surprised at, and I don't know what you guys think about this, I know we're winding down, is whether Congress will get involved with this. I don't know if it's at that level yet, but I think that is the only way where you really get an opportunity to peel back those layers.
What would Congress do?
I don't know. Do what they do.
They don't do much of anything.
But this is probably the exact thing that they would attack with vigor. Like, what's going on with this bribery scandal? I mean, it seems like it could be a congressional thing. I mean, Congress has taken on, more things. The steroids issue and other things in sports. So I don't know.
They have a very public hearing that amounts to absolutely nothing.
Right.
Because it's Congress who does absolutely nothing, unfortunately.
Although it does make them look good when they grill sports and sports business. So from your I totally accept your point, although that may actually be a selling point for them holding it, not doing it.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I think you got anybody out there who thinks this is the end of the story is naive.
Yes, for sure. And hopefully, to me, the good can come of it is if we actually have a clear-eyed look at the ridiculousness of quote-unquote amateur sports and billion-dollar industry of college athletics. And I am way too dumb to figure out what the solution would be. My only hope, and maybe my only addition to the real conversation, is that at some point we have to look at that, even in a positive way, to preserve the quality of athletics that it produces and the joy and pleasure it gives us as a people and a nation. Maybe that sounds a little silly, but there's few things that are as uniting anymore as March Madness, right?
That's a great point.
So like, damn it, I want some of these things still around. So I would love to figure out a way to not feel like a slimy mess for loving March Madness.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Chris, because I just really quickly, March Madness does unite, and particularly it gives people a chance to support. I mean, if your alma mater has the good fortune enough to be in the tournament, I mean, you'd be surprised. That's a whole nother topic. Be surprised at the number of parties that go on. If you happen to go to Duke, or if you happen to go to Gonzaga, if you're fortunate. I mean, my great Lincoln University Lions will never be in the NCAA tournament, but I can see how it's very uniting.
Yeah, I mean, my alma mater's only been in the tournament once in their history, and they got summarily flushed out in the first round. I would like to throw one more thing out that I didn't mention before, real quick, on the legal part of it. I mentioned bribery. That's just a part of the allegations. The whole second half of it is fraud and wire fraud. And just so people know, that's kind of the follow-on to bribery. Because once you get to bribery involving programs, receiving federal funds, then the fraud and the wire fraud is just tracing the money. And so that's the root of it is bribery. But just so everybody knows, a lot of these charges are wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. And it goes on and on and on. But the root of it is bribery.
Anytime you see the federal government start to use legal processes, statutes, laws, subpoena power, etc., in ways that look very similar to how the federal government has essentially busted up organized crime over an 80 to 100 year stretch, and use many of those same mechanisms, you have to say, okay, we're on to something that could be pretty groundbreaking in terms of an investigation and its outcomes.
Yeah, just to be clear, I mean, the federal prosecutors have got like a 95% conviction rate. Because they just don't file the charges until they have them locked up, and they have basically unlimited resources. So these guys are going down. There's no doubt all of them are going down to one extent or another. So
again, yes, another story which I am sure has already popped up in previous episodes, popped up here, and will only grow as this story I assume will start to dominate the headlines. And by the time we do get to March here, I can only imagine the kind of legal media sports storm that will be raging at that point, just considering that's its time in the national stage anyway, and it has a federal investigation in process. It will be pretty crazy. In fact, did you all see the meme around, the bracket with FBI versus Louisville, and FBI advancing in the bracket?
That was pretty creative. It was on a T-shirt.
Yeah, that was definitely a good one.
It had the typical March Madness bracket where it had the first line, number 1 seed was Louisville, number 2 seed was FBI, and then the FBI advanced. It was
bracketology to federal investigation. All right, I think that's going to end it with some good meaty topics this week. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple weeks. Remember, you can always talk at us with us on our The Hogsty Twitter handle. We have definitely been doing some fun kind of business conversations there, so jump in. It's actually been super entertaining to see some of these topics either kind of inform what we talk about, or kind of let some of the topics breathe afterwards and kind of share links and continue the debate and engagement. So please jump on there. You can find me at ChrisLarry33. I'm usually jumping into those threads, so join us. It's warm in the pool. Rich, how can we find you online?
You can find me at DiscoQ, DISCOQUE5 on Twitter.
And Steve is a man of international mystery, but he is one of the steady hands of control of the Hogsty Twitter handle. So Steve loves to engage there. Am I wrong, Steve?
Yeah, you probably cannot track me down individually, but if you try to find me at the Hogsty. I will be there.
Great. So join us there. Lots to pick at online and in the Twitter sphere. So we will see you in 2 weeks. Please stay tuned and join our flagship Redskins debate show, the Hogsty, and the All 22 NFL show. All 32.
All 32.
22. What is this, 1970? The All 32 show. The 3 shows on the Hogsty Network. Check them out.
All right. Redskins 26, Chiefs 23. All right, guys.
There you go.
Yeah,
I
I'll
like
just
that
sign
prediction.
on. Why would I want to argue against that? All right. See you next time. Bye.
All right. Bye, guys.